Reaching the absolute peak of the music industry is supposed to be the moment everything finally comes together. The years of touring, the creative battles, the label pressure, all of it is supposed to pay off the second your record hits number one. Yet somewhere in the mid-1980s and early 1990s, a strange and almost cruel pattern started revealing itself across some of the biggest names in rock music. Band after band was climbing all the way to the top of the charts and then falling apart almost immediately after getting there, as if the number one spot itself was some kind of finish line nobody had told them about. Fans eventually started calling it the number one curse, and the list of bands it supposedly claimed reads like a who's who of that entire era. The Police, the Smiths, Jane's Addiction, and the Bangles all found themselves caught in the same bizarre sequence of events where their greatest commercial triumph and their most dramatic collapse happened so close together that it was almost impossible to separate the two. Every single one of these breakups had its own messy, complicated backstory, filled with ego clashes, exhaustion, and years of built-up tension finally boiling over. But what made each of them so fascinating was that the number one moment did not save any of it. If anything, it seemed to accelerate the ending rather than delay it. The best place to start making sense of all this is with the band that laid the blueprint for everything that followed, and that band was the Police. By 1983, they were easily one of the biggest acts on the planet, and their album, Synchronicity, was the moment that made it undeniable. The record spawned massive hits, most notably Every Breath You Take, which topped charts all over the world. Every breath you take. And felt like it was playing everywhere you went that year. By every possible measure, the Police had arrived at exactly the place they had spent years working toward. Behind the scenes, though, it was a completely different story. Producer Hugh Padgham later admitted that the recording sessions were so tense and so full of bickering between Sting and drummer Stuart Copeland that the album was just one bad meeting away from never happening at all. And even Sting was already drawing his own conclusions while they were still in the studio, later saying it was clear to him during that time that this was simply the end of the band. The world tour that followed only locked that feeling in further. When they played their final show at Shea Stadium in August 1984, Sting later recalled feeling like they had reached the absolute peak of everything they could accomplish together. And he turned to guitarist Andy Summers that night and told him they should stop. Within days of finishing the tour, the band went on an indefinite hiatus that everyone involved understood was permanent. What makes their story so fascinating is that Sting and Copeland were completely worn out by each other through that entire period, yet somehow still delivered the biggest album of their careers, right in the middle of all that tension. The success did not fix any of it. If anything, reaching that level just removed the last reason they had to keep pushing through all the friction between them. And once the record made them the biggest act in rock, walking away actually became the easier choice. While the Police walked away after reaching the summit, the next band on this list did not even make it to the release of their final record. The Smiths did not technically announce their breakup the exact night they hit number one.
Oh yeah, I'm enjoying it more so now. The last few months I've been enjoying it more so than that for ages, yeah.
But the timing of everything that happened around them was somehow even stranger than that. By 1987, the band was finally becoming impossible to ignore on a wider scale. Their singles were climbing the charts. Critics were calling them the voice of a generation. And internally, all of that pressure was quietly beginning to pull things apart. That year, they went into the studio to record what would become their final album, Strange Ways, Here We Come. The music itself sounded bigger and more ambitious than anything they had made before. But while the songs were coming together, the relationship between Morrissey and guitarist Johnny Marr was deteriorating behind the scenes. Marr later admitted he was completely worn down by the relentless pressure, the touring cycle, and the weight of expectations that had built up around the band over the years. He also grew frustrated as Morrissey pushed toward older pop influences, while Morrissey on the other side was reportedly unhappy about Marr collaborating with artists outside of the band.
I think I've become a little bit slightly negative about the music industry.
Then, in July 1987, before the album had even been released, Marr simply walked away, and with him went the band. What makes the whole story feel almost painfully ironic is that the album they were falling apart over would go on to be considered one of their greatest achievements. When Strange Ways Here We Come finally came out in September 1987, the Smiths were already finished. There were no reunion interviews, victory tours, and moments where the band got to stand together and take in what they had made. There was just silence, and somehow that silence made the album land even harder than it might have otherwise. The record debuted at number 2 on the UK charts, which was one of the highest positions of their entire career. And over time, fans and critics began treating it less like a regular album and more like a farewell letter that the band had written without fully realizing it. The Smiths left behind a bittersweet story of what could have been, but the next band on this list took a completely different approach. Because unlike every other group in this story, Jane's Addiction did not stumble into their ending by accident. They planned it deliberately. By 1990, the band had become one of the bigger names in alternative rock. Their album, Ritual de lo Habitual, was getting a lot of attention, and Being Caught Stealing reached number 1 on Billboard's modern rock chart, pushing them further into the mainstream than they had ever been before. Behind the scenes, though, the group was already falling apart. Perry Farrell later admitted that the relentless touring and internal tension had worn down the chemistry between the members considerably. The Ritual tour ran for over a year, and according to Farrell, that stretch was a big part of why the band could no longer hold things together. Instead of quietly letting the band fade out, Farrell decided to turn the ending into something much bigger. That decision became Lollapalooza. Most people today think of it as one of the biggest music festivals around, but what tends to get forgotten is why it originally existed. It was never meant to be an annual event. Farrell himself described the original idea as a one-time tour built around marking the end of the band. Then, on July 18th, 1991, the very first Lollapalooza opened in Phoenix, Arizona. The lineup included Nine Inch Nails, Susie and the Banshees, Ice-T, and Living Colour. But the focus was entirely on Jane's Addiction, since everyone understood this was their farewell. The show ended with tensions between Farrell and guitarist Dave Navarro boiling over backstage, with one promoter later recalling seeing punches thrown as the band walked off stage. What adds another layer to the whole story is that just months later, Nirvana released Nevermind, and alternative rock took over the mainstream entirely. Jane's Addiction had been part of building that sound for years, and they walked away right before it reached its peak. Jane's Addiction chose their own ending and executed it on their own terms. But the next group on this list did not get that luxury at all. The Bangles are probably the clearest example of this entire pattern. In early 1989, the Los Angeles pop rock group released Eternal Flame. A ballad that completely changed the scale of their career overnight. The song hit number 1 in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and several other countries, and their album, Everything, was selling in huge numbers alongside it. From the outside, it genuinely looked like the band was stepping into a new era where they could dominate the rest of the decade. Internally, though, things were already starting to break down in ways that were difficult to fix. One of the central problems was that the band's identity had always been built around being a genuine group effort. Different members sang lead, wrote songs, and shared the spotlight relatively evenly, and that balance was a big part of what made them work.
There's a hit song of the same name, and we're joined by the architects of that song. They are the Bangles.
But after Eternal Flame, the public attention shifted heavily and almost entirely towards Susanna Hoffs. The media began treating the band as Susanna Hoffs and some other people. And that shift in perception created a tension within the group that success was only making worse rather than better. On top of that, the band was simply worn out. By 1989, they had spent nearly a decade together with barely any real time off.
You're all very good friends now, even with the major success, right? But there are obviously going to be some differences and rivalries.
Cycling through touring, interviews, and label demands without much of a break. In an interview around that time, Hoffs herself admitted the members were not happy anymore, comparing the experience to a long marriage that had gradually drained everyone involved. Then just 6 months after Eternal Flame reached #1, the Bangles announced an indefinite hiatus in October 1989. What makes their story stand out within this whole pattern is how little warning there was. This was not a band that had been fading for a while and finally accepted it. The Bangles were at the commercial peak of their entire career when they stopped. Eternal Flame was becoming one of the defining songs of that era. Everything was a certified platinum record, and they had never been more visible or successful than they were at that exact moment. And somehow, that was the moment it all ended. The Bangles collapsed under the pressure of sudden superstardom, but the next group might be the strangest example on this entire list, because they didn't just lose a member or slowly drift apart. They practically vanished. By 1989, Fine Young Cannibals were suddenly everywhere. The British trio had already built a strong cult following with their mix of pop, soul, and alternative rock, but their second album, The Raw and the Cooked, launched them into another stratosphere almost overnight. Then came the hits. She Drives Me Crazy exploded across radio stations and MTV, becoming one of the defining songs of the late 1980s. Not long after, Good Thing followed it, straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Suddenly, Fine Young Cannibals weren't a respected alternative act anymore. They had become one of the biggest bands in the world, with 2 US #1 singles in the exact same year. From the outside, it looked like the start of something enormous. The Raw and the Cooked topped charts internationally and turned the band into one of the hottest acts in music. Their sound felt completely different from everything else happening at the time, and Roland Gift's instantly recognizable voice made them impossible to confuse with anyone else. Everything about the moment suggested they were about to dominate the early 1990s, but behind the scenes, the momentum was already starting to disappear. Unlike bands torn apart by explosive public feuds, Fine Young Cannibals slowly burned themselves out under the pressure of sudden fame. Years later, members of the group admitted they never really wanted to become massive pop celebrities in the first place.
Not really, you don't really expect it. You always, in a way you think something must be going wrong if you can make a record that's a big hit.
The success came so quickly that they never fully adjusted to the attention surrounding them, and the creative chemistry that made the band special slowly started breaking apart. And then almost as quickly as they arrived, they disappeared. After reaching the absolute peak of mainstream success in 1989, the band spent years trying and failing to create a third album. There was no dramatic farewell tour, no public meltdown, and no huge breakup announcement. Instead, the group quietly drifted into side projects, solo ventures, and recording sessions that never really came together before officially dissolving in the mid-1990s. What makes their story feel so surreal is how short the entire run actually was. They released 2 studio albums, produced some of the biggest songs of their era, reached #1 multiple times, and then simply faded away. For a brief moment, Fine Young Cannibals looked like they could become one of the defining bands of the next decade. Instead, they became one of music history's strangest disappearing acts. This leaves fans with the ultimate question. Did these bands break up because they reached the top, or did the pressure of getting there destroy them from the inside out? That argument has never really been settled, and in a way, it captures something that runs through all of these stories. People are still debating what went wrong, what could have been different, and whether any of it was actually avoidable. Online communities eventually started calling the whole thing the #1 curse, and it is easy to understand why the idea caught on. There is something almost strange about the way it kept happening across completely different bands, where the moment of reaching the peak and the moment of falling apart were separated by almost no time at all. The more grounded explanation is probably less mysterious, though. By the time a band reaches that level of success, the years of pressure, creative tension, and personal friction have usually built up to a point where there is very little left holding things together. Hitting number 1 does not fix any of that. The chart position just happened to coincide with the moment when those underlying problems finally became too much to work around. Plenty of bands hit number 1 and kept going for years, so this was never some kind of rule. But for these groups, the timing was close enough that people are still talking about it decades later. Whether that means anything or not is probably up to you. If you have a different take on any of these bands or think there is another group that belongs on this list, drop it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this one, subscribe to the channel and click right here to see another video.